According to the major, we only had an hour or two before his commanding officer would start becoming paranoid. We left the base in a hurry, knowing that time was against us, and boarded the jeep. I took a last glance at the dead streets of Orlovgrad before the major floored it and started heading towards the wall. Within minutes, we were already out of the city, and we could see the lights on the wall in the distance. We headed for the same gate we had went through by train and stopped right in front of it. Volodin took out his portable radio and ordered that the gate be opened. I heard a loud creak, and the immense metal gate began to slowly move until it was fully opened. My heart was already pounding as the car moved through the gate and stopped a few meters further, in the front parking lot of the military base. We went out of the car and started heading towards the guard post, trying to adopt an official air. "Good morning. I need to see some identification." The soldier on guard spoke, and Volodin subtly signaled me to stay a few inches behind him. Volodin slapped his paper on the guard post's table, and the soldier saluted him. "The other guy is Lieutenant Ivanov, and he's with me. We're here to do a vehicle technical capability inspection." The soldier quickly adopted a very subservient attitude, as he was aware of how cranky most inspectors tended to be. "Everything seems to be in order, sir." I was still sweating profusely, as I feared he would ask for my identification papers as well, but I could finally let out a sigh of relief when I saw him exit his post and open the doors to the main building for us. We went through the door and entered the long hallway. The building, like everything else in Severovaya, was built in a minimalistic and sober style. There was a long hallway with its walls painted in an ugly shade of yellow that resembled the color of urine, and there were many plain wooden doors on both sides. Most of them seemed to be barracks, some offices that belonged to some lieutenants, and other administrative and logistical rooms. We were getting close to the other end of the hallway when a door on the right suddenly opened and a man in uniform came out. "Oh, Major Volodin, sir. It's been a long time since you last visited us," he said with somewhat of a fake enthusiasm. "Lieutenant Kuznetsov. It's been a while," Volodin replied, trying to fake a smile. "How come you are visiting us, sir? I heard you captured an American spy or something of the like, and that you're dropping him off today." "Not anymore. High Command changed its mind. They sent a special forces team a few hours ago with a helicopter. He's already in custody and is being interrogated." The lieutenant seemed to believe him, which calmed me for a moment. But then he pointed his eyes towards me, expecting me to state my business around here. "Oh, I'm Lieutenant Ivanov. I was dispatched here from the capital as Major Volodin's aide," I replied, trying to hide my sweating and my terror. Fortunately, the lieutenant only wanted us to shake hands and then continued walking down the hallway after saluting Volodin one more time. Both I and the major looked at each other for a few moments, as if both of us wanted to say "close call," and continued walking to the end of the hallway. Volodin opened the door, and I realized that it led to some sort of inner courtyard where the vehicles were being stored. A few moments after we entered, a soldier rushed to Volodin and saluted him. "Soldier, is the BM-27 loaded? We need to inspect its capacities at full load." "Yes, sir, it is fully loaded, as per the combat readiness protocol." "Ivanov, you go perform the inspection on the BM-27 while I take a look around. Soldier, open the courtyard gate." The soldier seemed slightly confused by the order, but opened the gate nonetheless. Another soldier came to me with the keys for the mobile rocket launcher. I entered the vehicle, started the engine, and started to slowly cruise towards the gate. I could feel my heart pumping blood so fast that I felt my entire body would explode. There was only one more step to be done in order to achieve the goal. As soon as the vehicle was outside the compound, I stepped on the acceleration as hard as I could and started heading through a field towards the wall. When I felt I was close enough, I parked the artillery truck parallel to the wall and looked at the targeting device. My knowledge of Russian saved me, as the system were completely different compared to the ones I had seen before. I managed to position the barrels of the launchers in the general direction of the wall when I heard an alarm from the distance. Our cover was most likely blown, and there was almost no time left, so I decided not to lower the stabilizing jacks. I hit the fire button, and within what seemed a fraction of a second, I could hear a deafening explosion, after which the truck rolled over, throwing me from the driver's seat. Somehow, I didn't black out, even though my entire body was hurting. I remained still for a few seconds, but quickly raised my head and looked around as adrenaline was kicking in at full swing. I tried breaking the windshield with my leg, but to no result, and the door seemed to be blocked. All I could hear was the sirens in the background and the sound of an engine getting closer. I stopped struggling and waited in the overturned truck, hoping that I had succeeded in destroying the transmitter system, certain that I'd be either shot on sight or be sent to the firing squad at the earliest convenience. The sound of the engine kept getting closer until it finally came to a halt. I heard a metal door open and the sound of someone's feet hitting the ground. Before I could twist my head to look through one of the windows, I heard a loud sound of glass shattering and felt a few pieces of glass land on my pants. "Get out, we only have a minute," I heard Volodin's voice shout. I started crawling through the smashed windshield, and Volodin grabbed me and helped me find my way out of the overturned truck. He was holding a huge sledgehammer in his hand, which he dropped on the ground. "Get in the car, now! They're coming for us!" The two of us scrambled for the vehicle, a military jeep that seemed newer and more powerful than the rust bucket we'd used before. Volodin hit the gas and we started heading towards the wall, which was still shrouded in thick smoke. I took a glimpse through the rear window and could see a lot of vehicles assembling behind us, some of which had already started the pursuit. As we were getting closer to the wall, we passed the first layer of smoke, and I looked in awe at what I saw in front of me. A large section of the wall had been torn to pieces, and at least two of the transmitters were turned into scrap metal. Once we reached the very base of the structure, I prayed the Major would find a way through the rubble, otherwise we would have been stuck between huge pieces of concrete and at least a dozen vehicles full of soldiers coming to kill us. The Major somehow managed to avoid most of the rubble, and the vehicle was powerful enough to climb over the smaller pieces. As we went past the wall, I looked forward and saw an entire sea of light. I looked in awe at the strange phenomenon until we got closer, only to realize that it was the city's inhabitants. An army of perhaps tens of thousands of silhouettes, the likes of which I'd seen before, were all heading towards the hole in the wall. The closer they would get, the faster they would move, up to a point that they weren't walking anymore, but gliding a few inches above the ground at a speed that almost matched that of our car. You did it, Mikhail." Volodin spoke, and I could see a tear forming in the corner of his eye. I had no answer for him. I just sat in the car seat in awe, looking at what was happening around me and disregarding the blood slowly dripping from the cuts that shattered glass caused on my arms and legs. We went back inside the city and noticed that Volodin was driving back to the small base we went to the very first time. "Vasily, what now?" "The military will need special approval to enter the city, but they'll get it fast this time given the circumstances. I'd say we have maybe 20 minutes before they storm the city, give or take." I stared at him, expecting more, but he continued driving without speaking a word more. I had already accepted what was going to happen. There was only one hole in the wall, and very soon it was going to be the entry point for hundreds of soldiers who were coming to hunt us down. Somehow, I wasn't overcome by desperation nor regret, and was at peace with my choice. A bullet to the head seemed a silver lining compared to dying after a few years of suffering in a labor camp. We arrived in front of the improvised base one more time, and Volodin jumped out of the car and ran to the entrance. I followed him inside and saw him throwing all sorts of old junk from some drawers until he finally found something that looked like a radio. He signaled me to stay in the living room while he took the device in his bedroom. I didn't hear anything for the first few minutes, but after a while I could hear the Major speak, presumably over the radio. Strangely, the little that I could hear through the door didn't seem to make any sense. He was speaking in what I assumed to be some sort of code. I was wondering what he could be transmitting and, more importantly, to whom. But before I could even ask all the questions in my head, he left the room in a rush. "Give me the handgun," he said and touched my holster. I was startled by the request, but I opened the holster and gave it to him. He went back to the room and emptied an entire magazine in the radio. He then opened the large dresser and took an AK-47 and a few magazines out of it. "Come, we're leaving." "Vasily, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted in confusion. "Get in the car, I'll explain on the way." We left the base one last time and headed in a direction we had never been to before. The major started explaining that in order to escape his father, he and his mother moved away to Sinistan, a neighboring country which had a very bad relationship with Severovaya, up to the point where a war seemed always imminent. He explained that, due to his origins, he was recruited as a spy for his new adoptive country, but once he returned to Severovaya years later, he decided to abandon his mission and remain loyal to his home country. The old radio he used was a special device he was supposed to use to report back to his handlers in Sinistan. I contacted Sinistan as a last resort. I let them know that the mission they gave me more than 2 decades ago was accomplished. "What are you talking about? What was the mission?" "Tearing down that wall." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out of my mind. The chain of events had become so twisted that every answer I'd receive would give birth to at least twice as many questions. The major told me Sinistan would send a special forces team to extract us, and that the border was 50 kilometers away from Orlovgrad. He continued driving until we were at the other edge of the city, just beyond the final row of apartment buildings. He suddenly stopped the car as soon as we were in a small field and the other side of the wall could be seen not far away. "This is the extraction point," he said and looked at his watch. "At this point, I'd say the evac team will be here in 15 minutes. So I tried to reply, but got interrupted. "I hope you can forgive me for what I've done to you back at the base. Thank you, Mikhail, for showing me what I was too blind to see all this time." He spoke, staring straight forward through the windshield. "Get out of the car," he continued on a completely different, almost angry tone. "Aren't you getting out too?" I asked, as I was leaving the vehicle. "The evac team will be here in 15, but our guys will already be here in 5. I'll make sure to keep them busy long enough," he replied and accelerated before I could open my mouth. The sun was already coming up in the distance. I saw the car fade away and lose itself among the decaying apartment buildings. A few moments later, I started hearing sounds of gunshots, explosions, and screeching tires in the distance for what probably seemed to be the longest 10 minutes of my life. The fighting noise came to an abrupt end, and I knew Volodin must have been overrun. The only thing I could hear was a strange sound that was coming from beyond the wall. I looked at the sky and noticed a dark point which quickly grew larger. It turned out to be a black helicopter which must have been the evacuation team. After it finally flew over the wall, the helicopter started lowering its altitude. A few moments later, it was hovering a few meters in front of me without even touching the ground, and 2 special forces soldiers signaled me to hurry towards the helicopter. As soon as I was a few steps away from the vehicle, they grabbed me by the shoulders and dragged me inside. Then they signaled the pilot to lift off. One of the soldiers started cutting my shirt and the lower part of my pants in order to bandage my cuts from the shattered glass. I let myself sink in one of the helicopter chairs, catching just one glimpse of the outside before fading off to sleep. I woke up in a white room, barely being able to hold my eyes open due to the bright light coming from the outside. As soon as I started moving, multiple people rushed in the room and surrounded my bed. I found out soon enough that I was in a Sinistan hospital and that my wounds were not particularly serious. A few government and secret services officials pressured me to accept to be interviewed in the following days, which I eventually accepted. I managed to convince the personnel to discharge me later in the day, although some doctors protested. As my release papers were being finished, A government official came along and asked me to confirm that I would answer their questions. He offered me a plane ticket back to the United States, with the condition that I'd participate in all the interviews. I hated the idea of hanging around for a few more days, but I knew no other way of getting out of the country and back home. Hence, the next 3 days were comprised of sleeping, eating, and answering more questions asked by all kinds of government and military officials. They initially attempted to convince me that the silhouette story was a result of the concussion I received when Volodin hit me, but decided to give up. They ended up thanking me for helping Volodin tear down the wall, as the transmitter system was also blocking the area from being photographed from the satellite. All the military officials were blabbering about the strategical importance of the satellite photographs of Orlovgrad, while I was laughing between my teeth. I gave up on trying to convince anyone that the satellite jammer was only the tip of the iceberg and patiently waited for them to give me the all clear to leave home. I was escorted to the airport and to a plane with New York, US as its destination. After an excruciatingly long flight, I eventually reached American ground and took a second flight back home. Once I finally found myself in the airport of my hometown, I realized I hadn't called my grandfather during the entire trip. I felt it was my duty to drop by his house first thing to make up for the lack of contact. I hailed a cab and the driver took me to his house. I left the car and slowly approached the front door, but was not able to knock for a few more moments. My heart was racing, and I had no idea what reaction to expect from him, now that I knew the truth. I knocked for a few good minutes and rang the doorbell obsessively, but the door wouldn't open. I then noticed a piece of paper with a phone number written on it on one of the front windows. I dialed the number and reached my grandfather's landlord. He picked up and I explained who I was, but he suddenly became silent. "Mr. Kolobkov, I'm really sorry for being the one to let you know, but..." I couldn't hear the rest of his words, as the entire world seemed to have numbed out for a few seconds, but I knew what happened. I took a seat on his porch, began staring at the road, and let go a few tears. Eventually, the landlord showed up and opened the door for me in order to inspect the property. The house looked identical to how I had last seen it, just before leaving for Orlovgrad. The only thing that caught my eye was a small nightstand that had always been empty. I moved closer to it and noticed a picture of my grandparents when they were young, in which my grandfather was hugging my grandmother. Underneath the picture, there was a small piece of paper that had "Thank you" written on it, with my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. "Excuse me, when exactly did he pass away?" I asked the landlord, who was walking around the house, waiting for me to finish. "The doctors who examined him said he passed away at some point in the night between the 17th and 18th of May, he replied. "The night I blew up the, I slipped up, but closed my mouth before I could finish the sentence. The landlord started staring at me, and I could tell he was confused. "Oh, it was my car. I had an accident the same night he passed."